Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. As the Crow Flies, enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. From Risa Walker, the award-winning author of the best-selling Chronos Files, and debut author Caleb Ansel, comes a chilling story of altered reality and psychological terror. Chase Ray sits perfectly still, his thumbs traveling across the screen of the broken computer tablet, stuck in the nexus between two worlds. Haddon Wood isn't real. It can't be. Another world, another reality, hovers just beyond his reach. He can see it sometimes. He can almost touch it. In that world, things are in balance. The dead stay dead and the creature feature remains safely on the screen. That world isn't a patchwork quilt of every scary book or movie he's seen. In that world, the nightmares generally end when you open your eyes and people don't glitch in and out of existence. Chase is determined to return to that world, although he's a bit worried that the only way out is through the noose that seems to lurk around every corner. He needs allies to get back home. But how do you choose your team when you can't tell who's real? As the Crow Flies, enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. Simon Says, the John Simon Thriller, Book 1 by Brian Thomas Schmidt. Master Detective John Simon is a tough, streetwise 17-year veteran of the Kansas City Police Department with a healthy disdain for the encroachment of modern technology into his workplace. When his partner is kidnapped after a routine stakeout by thugs with seeming ties to connected, wealthy art dealer Benjamin Ashman, he's determined to find the truth. But the only witness is a humanoid android named Lucas George. Reluctantly, he takes Lucas along as he begins to investigate and soon finds himself depending more and more on the very technology he so distrusts. Meanwhile, Simon's precocious teenage daughter begins to teach Lucas how to sound more like a cop using dialogue from famous cop movies. If only he'd used them in the appropriate context. This exciting new mix of near-future science fiction and procedural thriller captures the gritty realism of Michael Connelly's Bosch, the humor and action of Lethal Weapon, and follows the classic science fiction tradition of Isaac Asimov's City of Steel. From the editor of the international best-selling phenomenon The Martian by Andy Weir, and the national best-selling author of tales including official entries in The X-Files, Predator, and the Joe Ledger thrillers, comes the action-packed first entry in an exciting new series. Be sure to pick up Simon Says by Brian Thomas Schmidt and get into the series on the ground floor. Vedic by K.J. Heritage. The dead don't always die. Top company scientist Chin Jelinek has committed suicide. Vedic, a half-alive empath with no memory of who or what he is, will die in 6 hours if he can't find out why, or so the company tells him, an added incentive to get the job done. Our hero soon discovers he is one of the skilled, a genetically enhanced human revered and despised in equal measure, a bloodhound with a terrifying past who'll stop at nothing in his pursuit of the truth. And the skilled always get their guy, don't they? Vedic, number 1 by K.J. Heritage, on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. K.J. Heritage's uncanny sense of pacing and story puts him at the forefront of today's speculative fiction writers. Gritty, intense, and compelling, Vedic is something you don't run into often enough in sci-fi, a cerebral thrill ride you don't want to end. Prepare to lose sleep reading Vedic, delicious science fiction. That's what other people are saying about it. Find out for yourself. Vedic, the first book in the series by K.J. Heritage. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. survivor, mother, leader, and humanity's last chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them. But now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light. And that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Sharon Prentice Ph.D. on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It's called Becoming Starlight, A Shared Death Journey from Darkness to Light. Sharon, what a great story you have, and what a great book you've written. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hank. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
I've been looking forward to talking with you. But before we get into all the amazing stuff in your journey, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Oh, my goodness. That's actually hard to write because I never really thought about writing a book or being a storyteller. This actually came about because I was asked so many times to write this book. My patients were really the ones behind the actual fulfillment of finishing this book. Isn't that strange? No one's ever asked me that before, but that's a really good question.
Well, I like to ask that question because it tends to center us back to those first experiences that kind of ignited the creative process. And you said that your patients kind of prodded you for this. What line of work are you in, and who are these patients that you speak of?
I am a psychologist, and most of my patient population are terminally ill and their families. And I am usually the last one called in once a terminal diagnosis has been made. And it always comes up. I don't think I have been with not maybe a handful of people who haven't asked me the question, should I be afraid? And in my response to that question, I tell them my story of my journey through terminal illness, with a family member and just a lot of death and dying. And it always was asked of me, could you please write this down? Because when this is over and we are no longer with you and we're not talking to you and we don't see you, we want something to go back to so we can touch it, we can read it, we can think about it. We will have your story right in front of us, because it always helped them with their fear. So that's how Starlight actually became a book. I wanted to be able to give my patients and give their family something to hold on to, that they could go back to and just remember with some joy what they all went through instead of just the grief.
Right, and the joy and the grief are odd bedfellows in the grieving process, strangely enough. And I lost both of my parents in the last 12 months.
My goodness!
My mother on December 7th of last year, and then my dad earlier this summer, in early summer. And being raised by them, and my mother a very religious person, and my dad a not religious person at all. There were always the push and pull of,
Right.
what do you believe about this? And, what is, that's neither here nor there. But when you start dealing with the grieving process
Right.
and with these people and your experiences with them, you really, the whole gamut, and death for a religious person and for a non-religious person is pretty much the same.
It is.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, and we'll get more into your story in just a minute, but what is the idea of a shared death experience or a shared death journey?
Right. A shared death experience is basically the same thing as a near-death experience. And I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not know what a near-death experience is. The shared death experience is the same except for one glaring difference. The person having the experience has not died, is not dying, they are not ill. They just happen to be invited along to what I call witness the aftermath of physical death. You are invited with the person who has died to see what's going on out there.
So is this something that you see more common in terminally ill patients, where there's for lack of a better word, there's more of a plan in place of how this tends to go? Both of my parents died suddenly, and there was
Right.
no. My grandmother, by contrast, had Alzheimer's, and it was a very long process.
Right.
And the difference in those is stark and stunning.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to participate, and all of the words that you use, none of them sound elegant. Participating in death is not something we're comfortable with. But even more uncomfortable is getting news that someone has died and not getting to be a part of that. So yeah, can you kind of speak to the difference in those?
It's a funny thing with both the near-death experience and the shared death experience. There's no rhyme or reason, for either of them. It doesn't matter if it's a sudden death. It doesn't matter if it is a long, drawn-out, I'm going to use the word procedure, process. I know of people who have had these experiences that have been on the other side of the world when someone they love died, whether a car accident or illness or whatever it may be, and they have had some type of an experience with the person. Like I said, whether it was just, bam, or something that they expected. So you can't really say, you can't give a really good reason as for why these things happen to some and they don't happen to others. It's a very, very strange phenomenon.
Right. What was it for you, Sharon, that made you pursue this line of work and this sort of specialty with the clients that you see?
It was the experiences that happened in my life. I lost my first child. She lived for 2 hours after she was born, and there was no one that understood how I felt, or at least I couldn't find that someone who would even talk to me. No one knew what to say to me. So I was just kind of, left out there wandering around trying to find my own answers, and I didn't do a very good job of it. I got very angry and full of rage and just turned into this person that I look at now, in my mind's eye. I can see me back then, and I think, you poor little thing. Someone has actually said to me, why didn't you jump off a bridge? Because you were feeling the way you were. And at the same time, my husband was getting very, very ill. And once again, there was no one who knew what to say to me, or I didn't even know the right questions to ask at the time, to be very, very truthful with you. When you're going through these things, you immediately run to denial. And I was already in the anger and the rage. So not even knowing what to say to someone was very difficult. So then when my husband died, once again, trying to find someone to talk to, even though I had had the experience I had, was very difficult. So I decided, you know what? I am going to be that person that people can come to who need answers, or just to sit with someone who has been through the same thing. So that's why I do what I do.
Right. We as Americans, and we are both Americans and speaking to one another in America, and we have really a worldwide audience. There are lots of people outside the United States that listen to this, but I can only speak from my experience,
Right.
is that we don't do a very good job of grieving.
No.
We don't like it. It's uncomfortable.
Right.
We live busy lives, and we're kind of expected to get over things quickly and get back to
Right.
work, or
Right.
get back to, whatever our routine is.
Right.
And other people are uncomfortable with it because we don't have a process.
Yeah, we don't.
Have you found that is crippling people's emotional health because we don't know what to do with it, and what can we do to become better at that?
It does cripple us. Here in the United States, I'm going to speak the same way you are with what we do here. We don't do anything. We are so afraid of death. I mean, our version of death is, the Halloween character and, the 8 foot tall, black guy with the sickle. And we're so afraid of it. We just don't want to confront our own mortality. And we especially do not want to confront the mortality of those we love. So we shy away from it. And when, it's not an if, when something happens to someone that we love, we're absolutely lost. We are afraid to say how we feel. We are afraid to, tell them how we feel. We're afraid to get them to tell us how they feel. And so everybody just stands around, and stares, and they don't know what to do. And that is what causes the would-have, should-haves, if onlys after someone dies. I should have been kinder. I should have been more gentle. Why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? Did they know I loved them? All of those things that we should say, we don't, because we think if we say it, that means we are accepting defeat, because we see death as this very strange foreign thing. And if we go into the conversation about death, then we are accepting defeat, and we're telling the person who is dying or could possibly be dying, well, that's okay, give up hope because we know you're gone. So instead of talking about it, we just sit there and keep our mouth shut, which is the absolute wrong thing to do.
Sure. Well, another thing that is scary for us, I think, is because, of course, with death comes a whole host of other questions, and questions that we have for as long as people have been alive. We have wondered what happens next, and where do the person I love was here just a second ago. Now they're gone. Are they just gone? Is there something else? For going to funerals as a kid, it was always, well, we'll see them again in heaven. And you hold on to that hope, but nobody really knows what that means. It's just a kind of this nebulous concept that we hold on to because it makes us feel better. Right now, I'm sure in your practice and in your own life, those had to be questions that you struggled with, and how did you find peace with those questions, and how do you communicate that to your people that you work with?
That's good. I did struggle with where, why, how, all of the questions that people think of, and it's even now, all these years later, the main fear that people have is, am I just going to disappear into nothingness? Or the people that are left behind, they want so desperately to believe what we are taught from the time we're children, that we will see these people again. And then, of course, the concept of heaven and hell and all of that comes up, and that just serves to scare people half to death. And those questions, I did struggle with them. I really did, especially after my daughter's death, because I didn't understand how something like this could actually happen. I'd been taught, you were talking about your mom being religious and your father not being religious. When my daughter died, the very concepts that I had been taught from a child, as a child, in organized religion, just fell apart. Just absolutely fell apart. I'd already been taught that God was this outside, being, this man, looked like Charlton Heston, in Ten Commandments, sitting up there in the sky. And if I turned right instead of left or said something wrong, I was, thunderbolts were going to be thrown at me. And if I did everything right, then everything would be okay. Well, I could not, there was no place in my body to put that when my daughter died. So everything I had been taught just fell away, and I was left. I just felt like I'd been abandoned by everything that I had ever been taught. And I struggled and struggled and struggled. And then, like I said earlier, at the same time, my husband was getting sick. And so once again, this battle, I set up this existential battle with God and with death, that I was going to win this game, and I was not going to let my husband die too. This was just not going to happen to me. These things didn't happen. And I struggled and struggled and struggled. And, I kind of had a shortcut into the answers that I was seeking during my shared death experience when my husband died. Because, it's funny, people have asked me, why did this happen to you? And at first I would be like, I don't know. I really don't know. Why me and why not someone else? There's no answers to that. But over the years, I've really thought about it. And I think that this was given to me really for three reasons. The first being, I think God was sick and tired of me cussing at him and being angry at him and trying to let everyone else that came around me know that if, and it was a big if, God existed, he was this terrible, just the most evil entity that existed in the universe. And I think God got kind of tired of hearing that. But I think when Steve died, it was almost like he was saying to God, we got to do something for her. Let's throw her a bone here and show her what's going on, because she's not going to survive this, having lost, my daughter too, and then now him. And at the moment of his death, have you ever heard of sacred word or centering prayer? Yeah, I really think that that's what happened to me, because at the moment of his death, the other people in the room said that this noise came out of me that to this day I couldn't tell you what it was. That they have said that the human body, the mind, the noises that you can make when you're in the middle of absolute trauma and losing yourself. I think for me it was a moment of absolute letting go and surrender, and all ego left. And at that point, that noise became my sacred word, which brought me right into the very presence of this God that I had fought against for so very long. And being part of my husband's death journey, and then God showing me, okay, here's what's going on. That answered my questions for me. That's why I said I kind of got a shortcut. No, but it was an amazing experience, and that's what I use to help people who say to me, "Should I be afraid? And am I just going to disappear into nothingness?" I say, "Let me tell you a story."
Yeah. Well, Sharon, what do you say to people? And it sounds like you probably came from a pretty strict, rigid, religious experience growing up,
Yes.
and then had to find your path to, that kind of broke out of that box, but is still a religious practice for you, for lack of a spiritual practice for you, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
What do you say to people that don't have any sort of spiritual practice and don't believe in any sort of spiritual practice? Maybe the most hardcore dedicated atheist who believes that we are purely the product of evolution with no divine intervention, and when we breathe our last breath, that's just it. How do you help people with that sort of belief framework deal with grief?
Well, it's funny, Hank. I have had some really, really dedicated atheists and agnostics as clients, and they suffer from the same exact questions. toward the end because, it's very easy to say you believe in nothing until all of a sudden you have to believe in something. But for those people, they consider themselves very scientific. And it's very easy to start a conversation with them about the nature of energy and consciousness and things like that. And if you appeal to their intellect instead of the spiritual side of nature, you can get them to the point where they would actually say, energy doesn't die, and if I am energy, what happens to that when this energy that I am, this consciousness that I am, leaves this physical body? If you can get them to admit that that is something that's going to happen, then all of a sudden their thinking starts to change. And I have found that a lot of people who, like me, were raised with a very strict religious. I was raised Southern Baptist. Yeah. So, and during all of this journey that I had to go on, it just fell away. It just absolutely fell away because nothing made sense to me anymore. So it's actually kind of easy for me to talk to people who have nothing and are searching for answers, or even if they're not searching for answers, to be able to get into their brains and into their hearts from the, using science and energy science and things like that. Because the biggest fear, really, seriously, the biggest fear that people have is, am I just going to go into nothingness like I never even existed?
So the thing that seems to connect us all is that we're all searching for an answer, and we all will accept a certain answer that is just beyond us at some point. We just have to find that connection point with people.
Yes, absolutely. And I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I am finding that when you can get to the conversation about consciousness, that brings everybody into the fold, because every single person walking this planet has to admit that we are more than just this physical thing that we can touch and feel. I don't care who you are. I don't care what religion you come from. That none of that matters. If you listen to the words between the words, if you pay attention to the breath between the breaths, the ones that you recognize, everyone knows there's something underneath that. So that pure consciousness level, that pure energy is the thing that combines and unites everyone.
So in your practice, you start sharing with with your patients, with your clients, people that are going through this grief process of their own, and you start connecting with them through the power of your own story.
Absolutely.
What was when you first started discovering that was going to be the game changer for the people that you were trying to help? Did it start coalescing in your mind that there were certain parts of your story that were going to connect deep? I guess what I'm asking is, was there a cohesive story of your own that started taking shape, or is this just kind of sharing through experiences as they came back to you?
It was kind of both. I didn't. It was just this whole journey that just spilled out of me. I didn't have to sit down and think about it or plan how I was going to deliver it. I just started. When I am called in to be with a patient, whether it's in hospice or the hospital in their home, a lot of people are choosing home hospice. I get this look. They all have this look, the wide-eyed, what's happening to me, where am I going? And I recognize that look because I had that look on my own face. My husband had that look on his face. This is something that you recognize. It's this soul connection. And I know what they want from me. They may not even know what they want from me, but I recognize their question. because it was the one that almost ate me alive. And so when I go into whatever room it is, I will always introduce myself, even though they know who I am. And uh, asking them a first question is not really something that I do, because a lot of times they haven't even formed the question. They don't know what they want to ask because everything is all jumbled up. So I usually just go over to them, and I know I'm not supposed to do this, and I've said this lots of times. I go over, and man, woman, or child, I lay down next to them and put my arms around them and say, let's just talk. If they're ready to talk, fine. Most often they will. I can feel their body shaking and they're ready to sob, and I'll tell them, it's okay, let it out. If you want to sob, sob. And a lot of times they do, and that tells me which direction to go in. And so I will say to them, listen, I know you're scared. I know the questions that are in there that you need to form. So let me help you with that. And that's when I say, let me tell you a story. And I start with my life when everything was fine and wonderful and great. And then when it just fell apart, all the way through to right after I had the shared death experience at my husband's death. And I got to tell you, Hank, it's not that I'm anything special, because I'm not. There's lots of people in this world who have had these same types of life experiences that has brought them to their knees. But we have all had the same questions. We have all had the same feelings. We have all had, that same disillusionment of religion and life and all of that. And my story somehow seems to connect with every question they have, and it just kind of opens them up so they can say, yeah, that right there, that's my fear. That's what I want to talk about. So it's all right there in the story. So it's just something that I open my mouth and it starts just flowing out.
Right. Well, after sharing this with so many people in your face-to-face practice, when it came time to write this book, did you have a clear picture? And I guess why I was asking the previous question about how your story started coalescing when you went to transfer that to paper for the story that we could all read, right, without having that face-to-face conversation with you. How did what I love about memoir usually is it's a window into your life, and it usually covers a certain particular point of time. How did you decide where that window was, and did sharing your story with so many people personally, did that help you to define what the story was that you were going to write?
Yes, it did. It really did. But I knew where I had to start, which was the beginning. I had to start at the beginning, because people will say, how can this be happening to me? This doesn't happen. Well, I had the same, how can this be happening to me? So I knew I had to start before the world started to, fall apart beneath me. And then the writing, where to actually, how to put this on paper. I look back at it now, and it really makes me laugh, because the book is actually the third incarnation of where I started, because the first one was a really physically immersion into everything that happened. And it was just so incredibly traumatic. I didn't think I'd ever finish it. And my editor actually said to me, Sharon, are you sure you want to be this vulnerable? But it was a outpouring, just this visceral blah, 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 of everything that some of the stuff I didn't even realize was still inside of me. It was amazing writing it down. So then the second draft, I said, you know what, that's not necessary. That was my own, personal whatever there. That's not necessary to help someone heal or to help someone face their fear. So I kind of cut that out. And it finally ended up being, this is the story right here that I need to tell people, how someone can go from living a wonderfully joyful and happy life to falling so far down into the muck that you can't breathe because it's all in your lungs, to being lifted up again and understanding as much as, the human condition can allow us to understand about God and death and dying and what's really out there for us after this physical plane that we all are subject to at this time.
In fiction writing, we talk about kind of getting into the flow state sometimes where your mind quits, trying to devise things, and the story just starts flowing out of your subconscious mind. And sometimes you'll write a paragraph and you'll read back over it and say, "Wow, that was really deep. That was really poignant. I'm not able to write something like that. I wonder where that came from." It's interesting that you start talking about, telling your story and writing this memoir and things coming out that you didn't even remember. And I guess it's that same sort of letting your subconscious mind connect with what the story needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it wasn't so much that I didn't remember it. I think it was a more of a, where did I hide it away? And when I started to actually write it all down, all of these things that I had hidden away, the things that have, the tabs marked danger, don't open, those things they just started pouring out. And that was when I realized, wow, these are some things that I hadn't dealt with because they were too, to use that word, dangerous for me to actually open up and look at. And like the chapter on my daughter's death, that chapter took me a full 6 months to write, just that one chapter, because I would start to write it and the tears would just, and I would just sob, and my family would say, "Stop, don't do it," because it's still so incredibly close to me. There are some things in this life that you just never, ever, ever get over. That's why I tell people all the time, don't look for closure, because closure is an absolute myth. The more you look for closure, the more grounded in that very thing that you're trying to get rid of you become. And writing all of that, I mean, it was really good for me to get that out and to get that on paper. And that one chapter about my daughter's death has brought in so many emails and messages and Facebook posts, and from people saying to me, "Oh my gosh, you said what I couldn't say." From all of the people who have lost children around the world, I'm getting emails from those people telling me their stories of their loss with their child. It's absolutely amazing, the things that people say, and even more amazing is that we have all felt the same thing and all asked the same questions.
It's really interesting how we have all these self-preservation mechanisms.
Oh yeah.
And you talk about those memories that are in that folder, dangerous, don't go there.
Right.
And it seems like when we're able to file those things around, we're happier, we're not troubled and burdened by that thing because we can safely file that away. But as every great writer knows, when you start mining those things, that's where the powerful stuff comes from. And whether you're writing memoir, whether you're writing fiction, if you can allow yourself to go there, then something magical happens, something bigger than us and our own grief happens. And that's where we kind of have this shared experience through writing. That's what did you learn from the process of writing this book and having to intimately detail your accounts and knowing that, okay, this is going to go out to an audience of people I've never met, I don't have a relationship with, and they're going to see all of the ugliness that is grief and my response to it and all of that. How do you feel like you grew through this process?
Oh, one of the biggest things I learned was that there are times when I was an absolute total fraud. I mean, seriously, because I would tell myself I'm so strong. Okay, I dealt with all of this. I put it all away. That I moved on and away from all of this. I found a way to totally incorporate it into my life, so everything is great. I learned, oh yeah, no. And it just another thing that it did for me, it really cemented for me as a psychologist that what you do not deal with is going to come out in a really ugly way if you don't start dealing with it. A lot of illnesses are psychosomatic, and most of that will come from unresolved and unrecognized grief. And, in our society, as we talked earlier, we don't talk about grief. We don't know how to deal with grief. We tuck it away, and then we are told by other people how to manage our grief and what to say about our grief. All the I'm fines, all that. We are told you have a certain amount of time to process what has happened to you. And after that time, at 12 noon on January 13th, you are going to be done. This is what we do to each other, and we do. And one of the things I tell people, you must grieve in your own way, whatever that may be. Doesn't matter how long it takes. When someone says, how you doing? You don't have to say, I'm fine. If you feel really horrible, you have the right to say, you know what, right now, life really sucks for me. Okay. And you have the perfect right to say those things, because if you tuck that away, I will be seeing you later on for some type of medical issue.
Right. Well, and I think it also goes, working through this and understanding grief helps us to become more empathetic toward others, because, I live in the South. We have a very polite culture. When you bump into someone, you say, hey, how are you doing? And you don't want to know how they're doing. You want them to say, I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And I say, I'm fine, great. And we both smile and we walk away from each other.
Exactly.
And we haven't solved anything. We haven't, but we're very polite about it. But, if someone feels like they could honestly tell you how they feel today, that would make a big difference. Because if I'm not empathetic and you say, oh, life really sucks right now, my eyes are going to kind of roll around, and I'm going to, okay, well, good to see you, Sharon.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That there has to be some reciprocation there for that to really work. Yes, you have the right to say that, but I also need to be empathetic enough to know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's, I don't ever ask, the question that I ask to someone is, you doing okay today? How are you? You expect oh, I'm fine. And it's not just the person asking the question that really doesn't want to know. It's the person answering the question that doesn't want to make the other one feel uncomfortable. We are uncomfortable when someone tells us the truth about what's really going in their life, which is really kind of odd when you think about it, because we're all going through the same things. It's just a matter of degree. We're all going through the same things.
The title of the book, Becoming Starlight, what does that allude to?
That was always the title of this book. I actually had, some of the professionals tell me, oh, no one's going to understand it. And I said, well, they will if they read the book. And they're like, well, they're not going to buy it if they don't understand it. And I said, well, we're just going to have to get the word out. Becoming Starlight is exactly what happened to me at the moment of my husband's death. He had done a few things in that hospital room that were medically impossible. And at the very moment of his death, I was nose to nose, eyeball to eyeball to him, and he breathed out and I breathed in. I breathed in his last breath, which I did not realize at the time I had done. And when I opened my eyes from taking that gasp, I realized he had died, and I was on my knees at the time, so I could be close to him because he was laying down. And I stood up, and I've always said I stood up powered by some force that was not my own. And when that happened, like in the near-death experience, the floor started to turn all misty and was disappearing, even though I knew I was standing on an ugly old linoleum hospital floor. and the ceiling started to get all misty, and I'm thinking, whoa, and the room was changing. But what I noticed was the stars. Billions and billions and billions of stars. I could see each one of them distinctly, very unique. And yet at the same time, it was one massive star, and it was coming to get me. I mean, really, that's how it felt. It was coming. It was coming to get me, and it surrounded me. And I have said that I did not know where I began and where starlight ended, or where starlight began and I ended, because I became starlight at that moment. And I got to tell you, Hank, I went very, very freely into it, because there was this presence within the stars that was beyond every human emotion I had ever felt. It was beyond, you name the emotion. And this presence was so incredibly comforting and joyful and loving, that it was almost a numb feeling. That if you can imagine, as I said before, the rage and the anger and the hatred and all of the just dark, dismal emotions that any human could feel, I was feeling it at that time, including the despair at now having lost my husband too. And when I walked into that presence, or was brought into that presence, or whatever happened, all of those emotions, I went through anger and rage and hate and denial, and then started picking up the good emotions, the love, the happiness, the joy, the peace, all of those things all at one time, to a point of almost numbness, where I didn't really even have to feel anything. All I had to do was just be. Just be. Nothing was expected of me. I didn't have to feel anything, and I was cocooned in this, just cocooned in the most loving, peaceful, comforting feeling that I could have just stayed there for all of eternity and been beyond blissfully happy.
The book is called Becoming Starlight, A Shared Death Journey from Darkness to Light. I love the kind of subtitle down the cover of the book, Sharon, Surviving Grief and Mending the Wounds of Loss. It's not just about surviving.
No.
It's surviving and helping to mend some of those wounds. This is such a powerful book. Sharon, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. I'm going to send everyone to pick up a copy of it. There's links to the book in the show notes of this episode. If people are just learning about you, is there a place online where they can connect with you and find out more about you and follow along as new projects come along?
Sure. They can go to my website, SharonPrentice.com. They can also go to my professional, they call it professional, Facebook page. There's almost 35,000 of us on there now. And we have terrific conversations. That's where I get so many, private messages and stuff from them. That's Sharon Prentice PhD. And then there's an Instagram account, same thing, Sharon Prentice PhD, and Twitter. And I answer everything. I do not have anyone answering emails or the messages for me. It may take me a little bit of time because there's a lot of us on there.
You're right.
But I answer all of these personally. I don't let anyone else do it, because I know when people take the time to reach out to me about some great loss or something they're trying to mend in their lives, I'm going to respond to that.
Sharon, this has been so insightful and so much fun talking with you. We're going to send everyone to see you and to pick up the book. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on the show.
Well, thank you, Hank. This was amazing. Like I said, I was really looking forward to speaking with you, because you do really good work. So keep it up.
Thanks. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, child of the jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fanged teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No,"
Buddy whined.
"Not on movie night."
Daddy went to the window.
"It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet." "Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.